Tonight, we will start by discussing a possible breakthrough in one of the biggest mysteries in American history. I am referring to the search for D.B. Cooper's real identity. The most infamous unsolved crime in American history was committed by a man in a suit who boarded a plane on a chilly November evening in 1971. He was referred to as D.B. Cooper. That's the name we ran with anyway. Half a century later, the mystery remains unsolved. And now, a fresh twist might alter everything you believed to be true, thanks to pilot-turned-detective Dan Gryder. The day the hijacking took place. It was Thanksgiving Eve, November 24, 1971. One man in a black suit, slender tie, and dark sunglasses was ready to make history while the majority of Americans were thinking about turkey and pumpkin pie. He was not well known. He wasn't rich. He wasn't dangerous, as far as anyone knew. He had the appearance of someone you would walk past in an airport and then forget about after 5 seconds. But he had become legendary that night. At Portland International Airport, he purchased a ticket. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 headed for Seattle has one-way cash. He was hardly noticed by the ticket clerk. Air travel was informal in those days. No plastic baggies for your liquids, no body scanners, no TSA lineups. With a boarding pass and a grin, people could walk onto an aircraft. And this man did precisely that. Dan Cooper was listed on his ticket. He chose seat 18C toward the back once on board. Like a business traveler winding down, he ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, yes, that was possible back then, and blended in. He was calm, courteous, and somewhat appealing, according to the flight attendant's recollections. His briefcase contained something that would permanently alter aviation, but there was nothing about him that shouted criminal mastermind. He slipped a note to Florence Shaner, one of the flight attendants, shortly after takeoff. She initially believed he was just another man making advances on her. Without reading the message, she slipped it into her pocket. Her life turned upside down as Cooper leaned in and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." His demand was contained in the neatly capitalized note. For his escape, he had 4 parachutes, $200,000 in cash, and a fuel truck in Seattle that was ready to fill up the jet. Oh, and don't do anything funny or else. He opened the briefcase just enough to reveal her wires, red sticks, and what appeared to be explosives, demonstrating that he wasn't bluffing. The events that followed unfolded like a screenplay. Air traffic control was informed by the pilots. The airline rushed to accommodate both the passengers and his demands. They were unaware that they were being hijacked. Cooper ensured it. He instructed the staff to maintain composure, make everyone comfortable, and behave normally. Picture yourself on that plane, thinking you're only 30 minutes from Seattle, possibly organizing your holiday dinner, while a man directly behind you is organizing one of the most daring escapes ever. Cooper's plan was underway by the time the plane touched down in Seattle. The passengers were quietly released in exchange for the money and parachutes that the authorities gave on the tarmac. None of them knew what had actually happened. However, the crew remained his hostages. Cooper was given fresh directives. Take off once more. Travel south in the direction of Mexico City. Fly low, don't speed up, don't try anything smart either. The pilots did as they were told, and D.B. Cooper performed the unimaginable in the midst of a downpour someplace over Washington state's thick forests. Tying the ransom money to himself, he strapped on a parachute, descended the 727S rear stairs, and leaped into the night. Just a man and a bag of money disappearing into the storm. No GPS, no chase cars, no helicopters. The worst part is still to come. Since then, no one has ever seen him. One question, however, lingered after the smoke subsided and the jet was empty, more pressing than the night storm. What was the identity of the hijacker, D.B. Cooper? The amusing thing about D.B. Cooper is this. In fact, no one called him. D.B. reporters scrambled to cover the story as soon as it broke. Additionally, a simple typo somewhere in the mix changed the name on the ticket, Dan Cooper, to D.B. Cooper. The legend began when the error stuck like adhesive. He is still identified by initials that were never truly his, but that small mistake is kind of ideal. isn't it? Because the foundation of this whole case is made up of errors, partial truths, and gaps that no one has ever been able to fill. Like any other passenger, the man boarded an aircraft, took control of it without firing a shot, and then vanished as though he had been engulfed by the clouds. There is only a man-shaped question mark floating over the Pacific Northwest, no body, no verified landing location, and not even a single parachute remains. The FBI jumped into the case with all the force you could anticipate right from the start. They examined every word Cooper said, collected fingerprints from the aircraft, and spoke with witnesses. He was no twitchy, careless criminal. He seemed composed, even endearing. He offered them beverages and even paid his tab before he leaped out of the plane, according to flight attendants who later regarded him as courteous. Who does that? People began to speculate. Was Cooper military, ex-Air Force, a paratrooper, maybe even a CIA guy who'd gone rogue? Due to his calm demeanor and his very specific requests, the FBI considered all of these theories, but none of them ever came up with a name. The suspects then arrived. The suspects? Oh. The FBI followed up on over 800 leads throughout the years. They examined skydiving enthusiasts, Vietnam veterans, small-time offenders, and even a man whose family swore on their Thanksgiving turkey that he was the real Cooper. The agency searched the entire nation for spirits, but nothing stuck. In fact, the FBI formally ended the case in 2016 after 45 years of unresolved cases. Yes, exactly. Technically, the most well-known unsolved hijacking in U.S. history is no longer even under investigation. This is where the story becomes entertaining. The public took over when the FBI was not involved in the pursuit. Reddit threads, YouTube deep dives, armchair detectives, amateur investigators, you name it. Everybody had an idea, and some of them were completely crazy. Was Cooper an unhappy worker for the airline? Given that Dan Cooper is the name of a comic book character that is well liked in French-speaking Canada, is the fan a Canadian? Or perhaps, just possibly, he did not make it through the jump. And in reality, the mystery is just a man who is stuck in the Cascades. Here's the catch though, each theory reveals more about its proponents than it does about Cooper. He is portrayed by some as a cunning anti-hero who outwitted the system. According to some, he was a sad gambler who lost a lot of money. In any case, he has evolved into a myth, an outlaw folk hero for the jet era, rather than a man. And that's precisely why we're still asking the same question 50 years later. D.B. Cooper was who? Because perhaps, just possibly, someone has already discovered the truth if he wasn't just a nameless stranger with a parachute. Imagine yourself as one of the pilots on Flight 305, both inside the aircraft and inside Cooper's mind. The November afternoon is a typical dreary one. With a cabin half full of vacationers and a quick ride from Portland to Seattle, you're already planning your meal once you get there. Seat 18C just handed me a note. He says he has a bomb. That's not exactly the kind of message you want at cruising altitude, according to the flight attendant who abruptly enters the cockpit with a pale face. Because the pilots weren't merely sitting there thinking, "Oh, it's another passenger complaint," this is where the entire situation starts to seem weird, almost like a movie. No, they were directly dealing with a hijacker who appeared to know exactly what they needed in a matter of minutes. 4 parachutes, a fuel truck waiting in Seattle, and $200,000 in unmarked banknotes. The request wasn't made at random. He seemed to have read the playbook. And Cooper is fascinating because of this. His plan appeared somewhat ingenious at first glance. He chose Thanksgiving weekend, when security was essentially non-existent and airports were packed. Recall this was prior to the widespread use of metal detectors. He requested a sum of money that banks could swiftly and sensibly collect, just enough to get attention, but not enough to stall. And the brilliant move of the parachutes. He created the impression that he may take a hostage with him by requesting 4, which prevented the FBI from sabotaging the equipment without endangering the lives of innocent people. That is just chess thinking. Now imagine this from the perspective of the pilot. Seattle is where they land. Still thinking it's a mechanical delay, the passengers are quietly released. At the same time, they are on the tarmac watching as parachutes and cash are loaded aboard, and they are told, "Get ready to fly this guy south toward Mexico City." Oh, and there's more. He demands that the aircraft remain at 10,000 feet, flaps down, sluggish, low flight. That's not exactly smooth cruising, as any pilot would tell you. It's unnatural for a jetliner, noisy and rough. The most bizarre request of all follows. In midair, the rear staircase must be lowered. Now, the typical traveler wouldn't even consider it unless they are extremely familiar with the Boeing 727. Cooper was aware that it was feasible though. It was obvious that he had done his research, or at least knew someone who had. The crew is perspiring from the cockpit. They don't know if this individual is lucky, insane, or in the military. They just know that he will eventually return there, open the steps, and go into the darkness. But this is where the excellent plan begins to look less than ideal. Because nature doesn't follow your rules. Even though Cooper had the assurance of a guy who thought he had considered every possibility. Rain and wind gusts were blowing through the Pacific Northwest that night, and the temperature was chilly at about 30 degrees F. He wasn't exactly dressed for combat. He was dressed in a suit and shoes. There was only a parachute, a bag of money, and steely nerves, no helmet, no altimeter, and no night vision. Imagine jumping 10,000 feet through a deep forest in complete darkness without knowing your exact location because GPS navigation was not yet accurate. You might land on rocks, in a river, or in a tree. It's possible to become caught in midair and not even make it to the Earth alive. If this were Ocean's 11, it would have been the scene where the heist team abruptly realizes, oh, this might not go the way we planned. Despite this realization, Cooper carried off the heist. When the stairs went down, the pilots heard the surge of wind, felt the pressure drop, and then heard nothing. By the time they touched down, all that remained was the greatest mystery in aviation history, an empty cabin and a missing hijacker. But here's the worst part. In hindsight, was Cooper a desperate man risking his life or a master criminal? That is the point of contention. On the one hand, he got the setup, timing, needs, and psychology exactly right. However, without any survival gear, he plunged into some of the harshest conditions imaginable. That either extreme irresponsibility or extreme confidence. As a pilot himself, Dan Gryder enjoys dissecting this particular puzzle piece. The specifics make it clear to him that Cooper wasn't a lucky charm. He was knowledgeable about aircraft and may have even had military parachute instruction. The stairs, the plane selection, and the altitude all suggest that the person was an avid plane enthusiast. But after the leap, was that enough to keep him alive? The argument becomes heated at that point. In actuality, Cooper's scheme may have been ingenious enough to get him off the plane, but it's another matter entirely whether or not it kept him alive over the night. And that leads us back to the most important query. Who was the man in the costume when he struck the ground, assuming he survived that insane jump? I discovered Cooper's true self. This is the point at which the D.B. Cooper rabbit hole becomes the most bizarre. This case has resembled a huge jigsaw puzzle for decades, with everyone claiming to have the missing piece. Actually, I've solved it, says Dan Gryder, a pilot, aviation instructor, and self-described investigator. Now, before you roll your eyes, let me tell you who D.B. Cooper was in real life. Gryder is not your typical conspiracy theorist on the internet. Armed with a hazy photo and a Reddit thread, he has spent years investigating aviation mysteries and catastrophes, and he has developed a fan base by bringing to light what he believes to be hidden facts in the aviation industry. People were alerted when he targeted D.B. Cooper, not only by his words, but also by the way he delivered them. I found who D.B. Cooper really is. And it's not who you think. Gryder made the bold statement in one of his most well-known breakdowns. He presented his case with a blend of traditional detective vigor and aviation knowledge. He linked Cooper to someone he feels precisely matches the profile by citing details from the hijacking. Cooper's familiarity with the 727, his strangely specific demands, and his composure under duress. This is where Gryder's perspective differs. He doesn't simply bring up the same suspects that we've heard about for years. Rather, he asserts that he has discovered links and discrepancies that were missed in the FBI's initial inquiry. Gryder said Cooper wasn't just a career criminal or a drifter. He had a strong aviation experience, was at ease in the presence of aircraft and parachutes, and could easily direct a Boeing 727 to fly in situations that most pilots wouldn't even consider. Gryder supports his theories with documents, flight manuals, and interviews, which sets him apart from many armchair detectives. He discusses Cooper's choice of parachutes, including the particular model he selected, and the significance of that decision. In addition to the fact that he requested 4, he delves into how Cooper was aware of the 727's rear staircase, which at the time wasn't quite widely known. Those details shout aviation insider to Gryder. Naturally, not everyone purchases it. Gryder has a flair for spectacle, according to critics, and when you look at the specifics, his smoking gun doesn't necessarily sound as solid. In a lengthy line of persons attempting to become the protagonist of the D.B. Cooper story, some refer to him by another name. Here's the reality though, whether you agree with him or not, Gryder gave a mystery that had begun to seem hopeless a new lease on life. And perhaps that's why his claim caught on. It's intoxicating to hear someone boldly declare, "I know who it was." After 50 years of dead ends and cold leads, despite your skepticism, you're still discussing it, which is more than most of the FBI's official suspects can do. But in reality, Gryder served as a reminder of why D.B. Cooper continues to captivate us. It goes beyond whether he made it through the jump, where the money went, or even his true name. It's about the excitement of thinking that the solution is right there in front of you, just waiting for the right individual to put everything together. And it's not only Gryder who believes he knows the solution. Actually, a whole subculture has emerged around the search for Cooper's identity, a combination of detective work, obsession, and campfire storytelling. The problem is that once you start searching for Cooper, you can find him everywhere. This leads us to the following twist. What does it mean for the mystery if Gryder has actually figured it out? Does it lead to a fresh set of questions, or does it ultimately close the case? The most bizarre theories and suspects. Suspects were a constant in the D.B. Cooper case. If anything, more than 800 persons have been the subject of investigations, questioning, or unfounded accusations that they are the man who leaped into mythology over the years. A few suspicions appeared credible. Others, to put it mildly, they were more amusing than realistic. In any case, they all contributed to the myth's complexity. First, let's focus on the males who looked and behaved like the role. Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Army Green Beret who committed a nearly identical act a few months after the Cooper hijacking, was one of the first suspects. Like Cooper, he took control of an aircraft, demanded $500,000, and then parachuted out. McCoy received a prison sentence after being discovered with the money still stuffed into a pillowcase. People naturally questioned whether he could have been Cooper all along, executing the perfect repeat performance. Here's the issue though. Physically, McCoy did not fit the description. Cooper was in his mid-40s, according to witnesses. McCoy was a 20-something. McCoy was more of a duplicate than the actual thing, unless Cooper had a time machine. Next was former paratrooper and Northwest Airlines employee Kenneth Christensen. This guy was promising on paper. He had the parachuting expertise, the flying experience, and even the appropriate quiet, reserved demeanor. It sounds eerie, doesn't it? According to his brother, Kenneth confessed on his deathbed, saying something cryptic like, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." However, upon further investigation, investigators found little more that connected him. Just a family keen to make connections, a lot of coincidences, and no money or concrete proof. Dwayne Weber was another favorite. Weber whispered, "I'm Dan Cooper," before he passed away, according to his wife. Of course, reporters couldn't overlook such deathbed drama. He once hurt his leg in a way that matched the likelihood of a hard parachute landing. His wife later claimed he had dreams about leaving fingerprints on an airplane. Once more, however, the evidence was inconsistent. It was similar to attempting to finish a puzzle with half of the parts coming from a different box. Then there was World War II veteran William J. Smith, who harbored resentment toward the airline sector. Age, height, and military experience were all things he checked off, but again, it never quite fit. He was never definitively identified as the man, but like so many others, he became a part of the legend. Now, some suspects were simply plain crazy, while others felt at least plausible. Conspiracy theories proliferated like popcorn over time. Some claimed that Cooper never made it through the jump at all, citing the hazardous terrain below, dark night, and the severe storm. Skeptics stated, there's no way he could have lived through it. However, that just poses a fresh query. Where is the body? Surely something would have been found if a man with a bag of cash and a parachute had fallen out of the sky. However, a few things did show up. 3 cash packets were discovered in the sand by a little boy who was camping on the Columbia River's banks in 1980. They were rotten and decomposing, yet they were still traceable. Cooper was paid ransom money that matched the serial numbers, approximately $5,800 in the 1920s, sitting in the ground almost 10 years later. It's still unclear how it got there. Was it buried by Cooper? Was it washed downstream? Or was it planted as a breadcrumb trail of some kind? Nobody knows as of now. Another widely accepted theory emerged as a result of that discovery. The money survived, even if Cooper did not. Some detectives believe that once Cooper's bag tore open in mid-jump, the dollars floated downstream. Some people think it was evidence that Cooper lived long enough to conceal some of the money, possibly as a reserve for later. In any case, the discovery merely raised further queries. Then, there are also the genuinely bizarre theories. Cooper was a woman in disguise, according to some. He was a CIA agent testing out security flaws, according to others. It sounds crazy until you understand that this is the internet we're talking about, but there is even a section of it that believes he was an alien or a time traveler. All of these arguments, however, demonstrate that Cooper is more than just a mystery. He is a blank canvas. Everybody projects a different version of who he was and what transpired that evening. Some believe he outsmarted the FBI and is a criminal mastermind. Others saw him as a tragic figure who died before spending a single cent of his wealth. He is also a folk hero to a surprisingly large number of people. Before anyone could pin him down, Robin Hood, wearing a necktie, slipped it onto the man and disappeared. The preoccupation persisted even as the FBI's formal file eventually closed. It grew stronger, if anything. You name it, books, documentaries, podcasts, etc. Every detail of this case has been examined by others, and one person's name has surfaced in recent years as someone who may have cracked it wide open. And Dan Gryder's identification of possible suspects is where he comes in. In reality, was D.B. Cooper Richard Floyd McCoy? Richard Floyd McCoy is the name that appears most frequently in the Cooper rabbit hole. Why? Because the Cooper playbook was almost exactly the same as his own hijacking, so much so that there is ongoing debate about whether he was the person who actually carried out the most well-known skyjacking in history. Let's go back to April 7, 1972, which was just 5 months after Cooper's disappearance. 29-year-old McCoy, a proficient helicopter pilot and Vietnam veteran, boarded a United Airlines flight from Denver to Los Angeles. Not that he was blending in. Short-haired, tall, and wearing an army jacket. He carried a hand grenade and a pistol. He also gave the flight attendant a note, exactly like Cooper. He desired parachutes and money. Does that sound familiar? However, things become nearly too close for comfort at this point. In addition to demanding 4 parachutes, McCoy demanded $500,000, more than twice Cooper's $200,000 haul. During a refueling stop in San Francisco, McCoy ordered the plane back into the air when the ransom was delivered. Then he vanished into the night, bailing out somewhere over Utah. It appeared as though Cooper 2.0 had just occurred for a split second. The same daring mid-air escape, the same hijacking technique, and the same parachute departure plan. McCoy wasn't quite as fortunate. Which was the difference? Thanks to a tip from a buddy who knew specifics of the incident, authorities were able to find him within 2 days. In his home, police discovered the ransom money and even his handwritten hijack note. No more disappearing into mythology. McCoy received a 45-year prison term. He didn't precisely remain there, though. He and many other prisoners broke out of a federal prison in 1974 by stealing a garbage truck and breaking through the gates. His liberty was short-lived. McCoy was shot and died in Virginia after a standoff with the FBI. He was just 31. This is the point at which conspiracy ideas start to emerge. An FBI agent who worked on both cases was among the investigators who claimed McCoy was Cooper from the beginning. They cited his military experience, his parachuting abilities, and the striking parallels between the two hijackings. It made sense on paper. Critics, however, weren't persuaded. For starters, witnesses frequently reported Cooper's age as being in his mid-40s, but McCoy was only 29 when Cooper made his jump. McCoy also had a new appearance. Not nearly the chain-smoking, bourbon-drinking persona the stewardesses remembered, shorter hair and a slimmer face. The FBI was also adamant. McCoy wasn't Cooper, but he was a copycat. Nonetheless, McCoy continues to be one of the more credible suspicions for a lot of amateur investigators. Ultimately, isn't it at least reasonable to raise an eyebrow if someone is able to take control of an aircraft, demand parachutes, and disappear into the night twice? Perhaps Cooper was McCoy, honing his skills, or perhaps McCoy was a pupil who learnt from Cooper. In any case, his name will always be inscribed in the D.B. Cooper legend because to the uncanny resemblances. The problem is this. The story may get much more bizarre if McCoy wasn't actually Cooper and the universe miraculously created two men who were insane enough to jump out of aircraft with millions on the line. Pop culture's fixation with Cooper contrasts with Gryder's objective realities. The thing about D.B. Cooper is this. He's no longer merely a hijacker. He is legendary. He has been polished into this sleek anti-hero by pop culture, a sharp-suited man drinking bourbon, slickly donning a parachute like James Bond, and vanishing into the night. Songs, books, documentaries, and even sarcastic allusions in television series like Loki have all been written on him. Cooper's criminal past is forgotten. He is known for having circumvented the system. However, Dan Gryder's research dispels that myth. The real Cooper, he said, was no movie star swaggering debonair sky pirate. He was, well, just a regular guy. Certainly a man with aviation expertise and nerves, but not so much a glamorous or charismatic man. Gryder depicts someone realistic, perhaps even a little rough around the edges, who succeeded in making the leap because he was ready to take a risk rather than because he was a big person. And to be honest, that's where the discomfort starts. Ordinary D.B. Cooper is not what we desire. We would like him to be the renegade hero who got away with it, kept the money, and lived a happy life on a tropical beach. The myth is fascinating. The myth appeals to consumers. It's not nearly as glamorous to consider the possibility that Cooper was a rather ordinary man whose most memorable event was one audacious stunt. Perhaps that's the goal, though. We are challenged by Gryder's hard facts to distinguish between the man and the tale, because history is messy, but myths are entertaining. And the truth is typically the messier version. It's unlikely that Cooper landed gracefully and walked away smiling. It was uncomfortable, wet, and cold, if he lived at all. He wasn't a Robin Hood or a Bond villain. He was only a man who took over an aircraft and, for a time at least, got away with it. But perhaps that's why the notion persists. The fashionable rebel who snubs authority is the one we want to believe in. It improves the narrative. Although Gryder's realistic candidate might not have the Hollywood glitz, if he is correct, D.B. Cooper legend might finally make a comeback. Ordinary gambler, ordinary dude. D.B. Cooper is ultimately the mystery we will never be able to solve, whether he was just a regular guy with courage or a superstar in a suit. Stay tuned, hit the subscribe button, and follow along as we continue to explore the unsolved mysteries of the globe.